he is ardently against the diversity and inclusion efforts. He believes that the Pentagon should be focused on molding war fighters, is the term he will call them, or people who he believes are unilaterally focused on the mission and carrying out whatever that entails. You also mentioned he does not support women in combat roles, which is something that has been a part of the military since the Obama administration. So potentially going back on that could definitely have some hurdles if he decides to pursue it, if that's something that President-elect Trump wants to pursue.
Welcome to Reporter's Notebook. We talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle, and I'm joined today by defense reporter Mike Brest. Mike, we've had a flurry of Trump nominations as we begin the transition process to a new administration in January. Big names, big implications for defense. Let's talk a little bit about President-elect Trump's nominee for Secretary of Defense.
So President-elect Trump nominated Fox News host Pete Hegseth to be the next Secretary of Defense. This caught Washington off guard. No one was really expecting him to be selected, and his name sort of seemingly came out of left field. That being said, he spent about 20 years in the Army. He did tours, 2 tours overseas, and then did one at Guantanamo Bay in Cuba as well. So he has a long career in the Army, but what he doesn't have compared to some of his predecessors is experience leading a bureaucracy. And so, Secretary Austin, the current Secretary of Defense before his current job, led U.S. Central Command. The last pick that Trump had that was confirmed by the Senate was Secretary Mark Esper, who served previously leading the Army. And so the big difference between Hegseth and some of his potential predecessors are the fact that if he gets confirmed, will be in charge of one of the largest organizations in the country with a budget, north of $850 billion. And he will have a mandate from President-elect Trump to potentially fire generals, to, in particular, go into the Pentagon and sort of take away a lot of the diversity and inclusion efforts from the current administration.
Yeah, and that's been a big point of emphasis for Hegseth, is he's very anti-woke. So he's been critical of DEI initiatives at the Pentagon. He's been critical of women in combat. So it does seem a little bit like Trump is looking for somebody to shake things up on those fronts.
I think that's an accurate read of the situation. It feels like Hegseth was picked to be a bull in a china shop, and that's what he seems like he would do if he's confirmed. While we haven't heard much from him since it was announced that he would be the nominee for Secretary of Defense, he spoke on a podcast earlier this month where he expressed a bunch of his opinions on sort of what he believes are the wrongs going on in the Department of Defense, which gives us some insight into how he would potentially sort of lead the organization. And as you mentioned, he is ardently against the diversity and inclusion efforts. He believes that the Pentagon should be focused on molding war fighters, is the term he will call them, or people who he believes are unilaterally focused on the mission and carrying out whatever that entails. You also mentioned he does not support women in combat roles, which is something that has been a part of the military since the Obama administration. So potentially going back on that could definitely have some hurdles if he decides to pursue it, if that's something that President-elect Trump wants to pursue. The other big thing is that it's not clear exactly whether or not he will, or what stance he'll take towards certain generals. On the podcast he was on last week, he said the new incoming Secretary of Defense should fire the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General C.Q. Brown. And so President Trump, during his first term, nominated General Brown to be the Chief of Staff of the Air Force. And that made, he was the first black American to lead a service branch. President Trump held him as a hero at the time. And yet, once George Floyd was killed, General Brown spoke very publicly about sort of the difficulties he had as a black man in the military, and it did rile up a lot of conservatives who felt like he was speaking out of turn and felt like it wasn't his job to sort of talk about this. And so Pete Hegseth said that General Brown should be fired, but at the same time, if the president-elect were to make such a decision, it would be something that hasn't happened in decades. If he were to fire General Brown in the first 6 months of his term, General Brown would hold the shortest tenure as Joint Chief of Staff Chairman ever since the position was created. And so it's not clear if he will be fired, but at the end of the day, everyone in the military, senior leaders, serves at the pleasure of the president, and those are decisions that the president has the right to make, whether that's President Trump, President Biden, or anyone else who's served in the role.
So during Trump's first term, he actually tapped a number of generals for what are traditionally civilian leadership positions, and he started the recent trend of generals and recent former generals being Secretary of Defense, which has generally not been what has happened, and you needed an exemption, a waiver from Congress to actually get confirmed for the role. But it's no secret that he didn't end up getting along with very many of those people. So is this maybe a shift?
It looks like it is a shift. President-elect Trump said on the campaign a lot that he would fire the woke generals, is what he would refer to them as. It's not clear exactly who he is referring to, mainly because one of his biggest adversaries in the military was General Milley, who was General Brown's predecessor, who's no longer in the military. And so a lot of President-elect Trump's problems with the military are with people who are no longer in positions of power. President-elect Trump has said he wants to get justice for the Afghanistan withdrawal that happened now more than 3 years ago, but most of those people are no longer serving in active military roles or at the Defense Department. So whether or not he fires senior leaders, there have been discussions about creating an advisory board to review them even, but it's not clear how this will play out, whether the president-elect will go through with it, or even what criteria they'll use to evaluate the 3- and 4-star generals that they look at.
So the president-elect is also nominating Tulsi Gabbard to be Director of National Intelligence, and that seems to have stirred some controversy as well.
It has. So as people remember, Tulsi Gabbard used to serve in the House. She was a Democrat at the time and even ran for president in 2020. But one of the main criticisms of her then, which will probably come up from Democrats now as she goes through the confirmation process, is that she's spoken surprisingly positively about Russian President Vladimir Putin, as well as Syrian leader Bashar al-Assad. And she even traveled to Syria and met with the dictator who, as we all know, had used chemical weapons on his own people. And so a number of officials and Democrats have said they feel she's unqualified for the role and believe that a thorough vetting process by the Senate will have to happen for her as well as for Hegseth.
Be interesting to see what happens.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mike.